Mark D'Antonio and I had some back and forth. Well, let's talk about this because this is related to one of the stories we talked about, where there was this object flying above this tall building in Virginia Beach. Listeners may remember, we talked about it, I'm pretty sure, right? And people thought that there was a lot of people who could just jump on this drone. People are really jumping on drones. And sure, drones move pretty weird. They have lights on them. A lot of stuff can be drones. And so, but there were a lot of people also who were nearby. You saw this, Jason, where they were replying and they're saying, no, that's probably hawks and birds because we've got a lot of hawks around. And some people even sent us videos of hawks, playing in the wind, where they'll sit there in the wind for a while, swoop down, and then sit in the wind where it looks like they're sitting still for a small, or hovering in one place for a long time. And you know what? I think that's what it turned out to be.
Yeah, that's probably right. And it's so funny how some people get things just so fixated on one idea that they ignore other things, other videos that show exactly what you're seeing in another particular video, or people who live there and see something repeatedly and say, hey, we see that all the time. Nothing against Mark. I love Mark, but and we're drone people too. We always
totally.
We regularly call things out for drones because there are a lot of drones flying around. But when you have other, evidence that you can look at and other possibilities, it's kind of important as a researcher to entertain those possibilities.
Yeah, drone's your middle name, in fact, at least for today.
It is. Today I am Mr. Drone.
And actually, we're going to talk more about this and more about where we actually, you and I were kind of going back and forth with Mark a little bit on another story, but we'll get there. However, I want to tell people first about our guests. First of all, this is cool. At the end of the interview today, there is a special surprise for everyone. And I won't say what it is. You're going to have to listen and wait to the end. But you're going to be really exciting, and it really is kind of portend something coming up in the future, which is going to be really exciting that we're going to be doing here on the show. But the guest is Luigi Vendittelli. You might not have heard from him. He's kind of an independent UFO researcher in Canada, in Montreal. He's actually more of an alien contact researcher. And this is kind of fun because I know a lot of our listeners are really skeptical when it comes to alien abductions and alien contacts. I hear from a lot of people because, of course, I communicate with a lot of the more careful and skeptical researchers in this field because really, as you all know, I'm pretty conservative, me and Jason both, in our views in this field. But, Jason nor I can deny that there's amazing cases out there, like the Allagash guys who we kind of gave you lots about, and like Travis Walton, and I mean there's some really weird cases out there. So Luigi has investigated some of these really strange cases in the Montreal area, and so we brought him on to talk about some of those cases. He is actually visiting because he's also a drone expert. He actually sells them, the kinds of quadcopters with the cameras on them. And in fact, Open Minds got one recently. So he came out and he helped us also learn how to fly it. So hopefully we'll be getting some cool footage in the near future. We've gotten a lot of cool drone footage you might have seen like at our conference or at some other things. But we've been relying on others. Luckily, we have lots of friends who use these and get some good video, and they've lent us that video or gotten video for us. But yeah, so this is really exciting. So Luigi's our guest coming up in just a little bit. Before that, we'll get into the news, and let's start off with you, Jason. What is some of the news you'd like to talk about, my friend?
Well, since we have a guest today from Canada, and we're talking about drones, let's talk about this story from Canada. So a couple, a husband and wife, saw UFOs like zooming around the sky outside their residence, and this was in a place called Esquimalt in British Columbia. This happened last week. It was during the night, early nightish, around 8:30 p.m. The couple was in bed. They were watching TV in their bed, and they noticed out the window in their bedroom two objects zipping through the sky. So they raced out to their balcony so they could get a better view of these strange objects moving around. And the husband explained to CTV News, he described it, he only saw one at a time because the second object disappeared pretty rapidly, but he described one of the objects as being as big as a Volkswagen, flying like a drone, except much faster. And it had lights that spun in all different directions. So pretty interesting and bizarre thing he sees zipping around the sky. The upstairs neighbor also saw the UFO zipping around the sky. And the local media there contacted the Navy base. There's a Navy base right there. And Navy base declined to look at the video. The witness managed to capture one of these objects on video with a cell phone. The Navy declined to look at this video, but they did go on record and say that there was no military activity in the sky that night. So CTV, they're maybe going to look into it a little more, but we're probably not going to hear anything more about it, as is the case with these stories most of the time. So this witness, he did say it looked like a drone, but it moved much faster. He thinks it could possibly be proof of extraterrestrial life, but he's not sure. He just wants to find out what it is. But Alejandro, what do you think about the video that shows this object moving through the sky?
Yeah, this is a perfect case. This is going to be our drone day, because I think we're going to be talking a lot about it. Coincidentally, funny enough.
Yeah.
It's not like we planned it out this way. But this is the perfect case where this is a perfect example where I think one of the experts they referred to got it right. They talked to a guy who works with drones to do photos and stuff like that. And that guy said it most likely is, and it's his opinion that it's probably a multi-rotor electric air vehicle, he says. However, he says, based on the video, it's impossible, though, to make a conclusion. A definitive conclusion as to what it is.
Yes, I love that responsible response.
And that's all we can say,
Yes.
Even with you and I mean, we try to do that too, because even though we may have our opinions and we're like, well, it's probably this, all we can do is lay down the evidence. But unless we have some direct, certainty, we can't be sure. So in this case, I kind of feel like he said it perfectly. It looks like it's probably a drone, but unfortunately, we can't really say for certain. But certainly drones can do some incredible stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll echo his statements. I mean, that's my personal opinion as well. I believe, based on that video, the appearance and behavior of the object is consistent with a drone. So that is most likely the identification, but it could be something different. And, that's the best we can do. And at the bottom of that story, we did post a video showing the incredible capabilities of some drones. So people should watch that when people think, drones are slow and can only do so many things. This thing rockets through the sky. It's crazy seeing the maneuverability that some of these drones are capable of. Yeah,
they can do some incredible things these days. And I guess, the frustration is that, a lot of people will go, and even, people who are supposed to be investigators will just, we'll post a story like this, and I think I saw a response to this story on our Facebook where someone said, that's a drone. And it's like, well, you don't know that for sure. Not even the expert can say that for sure. And, as journalists, we have to rely on expert opinion. Of course, we have experience ourselves, but we're not necessarily experts. And so I think the expert put it perfectly, that most likely a drone. Like you, I think that he put it well. And that's just a frustrating part, is that when people are so certain and conclusive without, really doing full investigation, sometimes not even having all the information. And you've always got to allow for, we don't know for certain.
Oh, those hard-headed know-it-alls. They know better than we do, Alejandro.
Yeah, those sons. So the next story to talk about, and this is the one where that's created a lot of to-do out there. And this is really interesting and weird, and this is this sighting in San Diego. So on Tuesday night, people saw something in San Diego. There were a few people to call into the local NBC station and say, I saw a weird light out there. And there was one person who got a photograph. The picture shows what looks to be like a string of multicolored lights, as the NBC calls it. However, this is something that we've seen before. As UFO researchers, we get this a lot where people film a point of light in the sky, and what happens with your camera is it's trying to bring in as much light as possible so the aperture stays open longer. And so when the aperture is open longer, that means that if you move or shake, and some of you have noticed this, when you try to take pictures in darker situations, how it's all blurry and fuzzy, it's because the aperture is open. So if you move, it's going to blur the picture and everything and make these streaks and stuff. And that's what we have here. It happens all the time in paranormal research. And so you can't tell really what's going on with this picture. It's a point of light, sure. We also know in UFO research, typically when people see one bright point of light in the sky, it's usually a celestial object, a planet, a star, often Venus, because Venus is so incredibly bright at times. Mars is also bright at times. Other stars can be really bright. And, there's scintillation. I mean, when it's lower on the horizon, you're looking through more atmosphere, even smog and stuff, and it's going to look like it's changing colors and wiggling, and it's going to be twinkling. That's what causes star twinkling. And so all of these things can make things look weird. I mentioned that when I posted the story. Again, being, we can't be conclusive, we can't say for sure. I think the person who took this picture, or there were a few people who said, oh, there's no way, I can't believe you're even suggesting it's a star. I did post some information from earthsky.org where it shows Venus and Mars were in the sky. In the general area, they said they saw it to the southwest, and the Venus and Mars were west-southwest, more almost directly west, but a little bit southwest in the sky. But then again, there were other witnesses who said, you know what, I took a picture, I thought this was weird, but then I realized it was Venus. There's another witness who said the same thing, I thought it was weird, but I saw it, then I realized it was Mars. So there are witnesses who say it's something weird, witnesses saying it's Venus or Mars, but to further complicate things, NBC said one of their photographers saw it. Then, just a couple days ago, they posted a video that their photographer supposedly got. It's of a group of lights in the sky. Some of them are pulsing, some of them are blinking. What's weird is that the pulsing light towards the ground, or in the sky, is very similar to a pulsing light that's at the top of a tower that you can see near the ground. I mean, the timing of the pulsing is exact, but they're out of sync, so they're not pulsing at the same time, which is kind of weird. So why was there debate? Well, there were some people, jumped on the drone thing, of course, early, but it didn't seem like we had drone-ness going on here. I mean, it was staying in one spot. It seemed like more likely a star or something like that. And then when you saw this NBC video, you see this cluster of lights. The cluster of lights looks to be a reflection in the lens from the lights on the ground. I talked to Mark D'Antonio about this, and at first, of course, he thought it was probably a drone or something or some other things. But then he looked at it closely and he said, you're right, I think it is a reflection of those lights. And he accounts for the lights not being in sync, that sometimes the camera can pick up lights over the horizon or behind trees that we can't see, and that could be why there's another tower that we just can't see on the ground in the video that is blinking in sync with the light in the sky. So really the lights in the sky appear to be that. The problem is this, that if it was a reflection in the lens, the cameraman should have known that, because he wouldn't have seen that with his eye. He only would have seen it in the camera. This looks really fishy. So I know Lee Spiegel, I'm not sure if he's posted the story yet, But he actually is writing a story on this, and he talked to NBC, and they refused to talk about it. So he asked if he could talk to someone. They said, no, we don't want to comment. So then he asked, well, can we at least talk to the cameraman? And he got a response that said, the manager doesn't want anybody talking to anybody about this. Really fishy. I think something goofy's going on here. I think they know at NBC that photographer knows what he got, and they're just posting this sensational-looking video to sensationalize the story.
It could be. I mean, I don't want to.
I might be going conspiratorial here,
but it's possible, and we really don't know much about this photographer anyway. What his affiliation is with the network, because they use a lot of different independent contractors and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows how credible this guy is? But I mean, when you look at it, and if you do look at the lights below and the color of the lights and the spacing of the lights, it is a reflection. It's just that weirdness with the delay and that flash, and Mark could be onto something, but there's just a lot of red flags going on with this story.
Yeah, a lot of red flags, and typically, and it is strange, especially for a news station not to talk to, Huffington Post. That's kind of weird that they wouldn't comment. So, yeah, a lot of weirdness going on with this one, I think. Who knows, huh?
And with the, original image of the, snake type thing.
Yeah.
Where you mentioned, again, I mean, we do understand, and Alejandro and I both know that there are lots of mysterious things in the sky, and even bright points of light that, do hover, but then move off and do strange things. I know I've seen that too. We're not saying that every motionless light in the sky is a planet or a star or something. Most often, like Alejandro said, that is the case, though. And they do look weird. They do twinkle, and it looks like they flash or move or kind of wobble. And we said it before, and I'll challenge you again. Do take your crappy cell phone camera. Do take even your good camera and go outside at night. Zoom in on a planet, a star, even the moon. Do an extreme zoom with your camera, the best camera you have, and zoom as far in on the moon as you can at night. And you'll see how bizarre things look. They look like they're changing color. It looks like they're changing shape. Things with night photography are very tricky. Mm-hmm. So the videos and photos we see can appear to show us anomalous things, but most of the time they're very normal celestial things. So try it out for yourself. See what you see in your photos and videos. And that might give you a better idea of what you're seeing in a lot of these photos and videos.
Right. Well, and Jason and I know, because we both own many lenses and cameras, and we're doing this often. Like when we get pictures even at conferences, that's a low light situation, so we have to be careful and use the right equipment. And of course, we go on skywatches, so we just have to be cognizant of these, because Jason and I have to contend with these things on a regular basis also.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, sir. I'm going to go fly a drone.
All right. Have fun.
Adios.
Sounds like there's a song there. Let's go fly a drone. Something. I'll come up with something. All right. You have a great week, Jason.
Thank you, sir. You too.
All right, there's other cool stories, too. Of course, Roger Marsh always posts them from MUFON. There's a Mississippi sighting that was really cool. There's a lot of buzz going on around a UFO over New York, the Bronx, and we wrote about that. You can read about information there. You can read about Giorgio Tsoukalos' own UFO sighting he talked about recently. And then also Jason wrote something about NASA wanting to hear from people about these weird lights on Ceres. However, NASA says, don't tell us they're UFOs. Essentially, they're not putting that out there as a possibility. So anyway, let's get to talking to our guest today, Luigi. All right, I am very happy to welcome Luigi Vendittelli to the show. Hello, Luigi.
Hello, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Very good.
And you're actually, and people might be able to tell a little bit of the echo, you're actually in our offices.
Yes, I am.
Visiting from Canada.
That's right, from Montreal.
Montreal. I've never been there. I've heard it's beautiful.
It's a beautiful place. This time of year is not bad. The winters get pretty cold.
Yeah. I've only been to one town. It's a small one in Canada, and they have the underground kind of, or does a lot of places have the?
A lot of places have.
Underground
I mean,
malls.
Toronto has an underground, city, but Montreal as well.
Uh-huh.
The downtown is really cool. Yeah.
So you have been a kind of, I guess to say a UFO researcher would probably not be completely accurate, right? You do more than that.
Well, yeah. Well, I've been involved in the field for close to 30 years. I was a member of MUFON back in 1989
Wow.
until 1991, and I was younger back then, and so I got to officially get involved in the field and the research of that back then. Then I stopped, continued with some school and work, and then got back into it a few years ago. I do a lot of personal research on the abduction and contact cases, and also became a field investigator maybe a year or two ago with MUFON. So I do some of that field investigative work when I have time, but most of my investment in this has been on some very particular cases outside of the field investigative work at MUFON.
Mm-hmm. And these are mostly like abductee and contactee cases.
A lot of the work that I do is specific to abductee and contactee cases. I work also with Professor Don Donderi from Montreal, who's a retired McGill professor of psychology. I've also worked with David Jacobs in terms of learning how to work on hypnosis to do past regression for some of the abductee cases, and worked myself with a lot of people who have had very strange experiences or very bizarre experiences causing them to believe that there's something else happening in their life that could be related to this phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. So when was it that you first heard about the abduction phenomena, and what did you think? Were you skeptical at first?
I was reading about it when I was 15 years old. I was reading a lot of work from the late Bud Hopkins, and it was probably the one thing that fascinated me most was the work that he was doing, and it was not something that I was closed to. It was intriguing to me. I wanted to make sure that that people were actually not misidentifying conventional things that could have been related to their past or some type of trauma or anything like that, to make sure that people are not just hallucinating or anything to that. And I came to realize after doing a lot of research and reading a lot about it that this was real. That this was in fact a real phenomenon that merited a lot of attention, not just by myself, but obviously by a lot of people. And I would have hoped that by now, after all these years, that there would be more, academics involved to take this very seriously.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, how was it for you? Because, of course, the idea of UFOs even existing is hard for some people to kind of get a grasp of. But, of course, the idea of alien abduction is even more fringe.
Right.
When you started getting into this, were you sharing with your friends and family what you were finding out? And what were they saying?
Yeah, it was well, the believe it or not, the reason I got interested in this was a sighting that my grandfather had, my mother's father, in 1965 in Montreal. And, being from an Italian family, old-fashioned, Catholic Italian family, you rarely hear a grandfather talk about UFOs. So when we heard his story, it was definitely something that we all believed, because he wouldn't invent these things. So that caught my attention. I was very young. I must have been, I think, 9 years old at the time. And since then, I was hooked. I was hooked on the what could be out there. So the fact that somebody could see a UFO, because he saw this craft in the sky over Montreal in 1965, and so that was one thing. To bring it to the next level and find out about the abduction cases, that came a little later. My friends, I would say my family was actually pretty open to it. Considering what my grandfather had experienced. So I think the fact that his experience happened helped my family accept my interest in the field. My friends, it was hard. High school was hard. I remember, I was the UFO guy in school, so I wasn't the most popular guy back then. I mean, talking about the 80s, so. It wasn't a very famous topic back then.
Mm-hmm. It was funny because that just reminded me of a story when I had done something on the news or something. Maybe the first time I was on the news talking about UFOs, and my cousin said, "Well, now you're never gonna get a girlfriend."
Yeah, exactly.
It was pretty funny.
That actually happened to me too.
Yeah. So then you began to get, or at some point started working with some of these cases. So what was maybe your first abduction case you came across, and what was that like?
The first cases were indirect cases. I never was the primary investigator or researcher on the cases. I was always working like as a sidekick. Or reading, kind of following to learn a little bit. I didn't want to take on any cases because I didn't have enough experience or I didn't have enough knowledge on the subject to even warrant my involvement at the time. So I did a lot of research and I did a lot of studying on it for many, many years before I would even take up cases. Initially, I started talking to the first real case was a woman that lives in Quebec today, and at the time, who had an incredible experience in 1975 during her pregnancy. And I had met this woman through her daughter, and the event was so incredible. It was so well detailed, and the woman was so credible that it really got me interested, and I started investigating or researching the case. And it was definitely what we hear about, where somebody will experience some type of either paralysis or there's some type of creature or some beings are showing up. And in this case, she was in her bedroom and suddenly these beings came through the wall in her room and she wasn't able to move. She remembers seeing two little gray beings standing by her bed and she couldn't move and she was panicking and started asking them to leave so she could speak. And she could hear them. She says she could hear them talking, but they weren't talking. They were telepathically talking to themselves. They weren't talking to her directly. And she remembers them saying, one saying, "She's not ready yet," while the other said, "Yes, she is, and she needs to come with us." And so she remembers hearing this in her mind and saying, "Leave me alone, leave me alone." And she says, she had initially said to me, that she convinced them to leave. So she said they finally didn't take her because she says she felt they wanted to take her, and they finally left, and they left through the same way. She says this big bright white light was in the corner of the room, and they went through this light which was going through the wall, and they were gone. The interesting thing is that she was 8 months pregnant at the time. And she had gone to see her doctor throughout her pregnancy to make sure everything was okay. The doctor, in those days, in 1975, they didn't do ultrasound, so they would check for the heartbeat. And the doctor had clearly mentioned to her, because she was complaining that she was very big, and he said that the baby is fine. She said, "Is it possible that I have twins?" And he said, "No, there's not. There's just one baby." And when she delivered the baby 1 month after this event, she delivered a baby boy. And a few minutes after, the nurses came screaming to the doctor, "You have to come back because there's another baby." So the doctor said, "This is impossible. There can't be another baby," and there was. And my friend, who I met, was born. And this was an interesting case because, having met the mother, having spoken to her, she's a very, very credible, very wonderful, very sane woman. And the daughter, who was apparently a surprise baby, which is my friend, also has had some very interesting experiences of her own during her youth and remembers them very clearly. So that got me really involved into what that particular case, for some reason, opened doors to other cases where other people found out, "Oh, I'm working on these abduction cases, so I want to introduce you to somebody who wants to talk about this privately." And so it progressed from there. And at this point, I'm working on some very, very interesting, very unconventional experiences that some people have had. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go through some of those because they are really interesting. So what was the next one? What was the next?
The next one was related to a woman who lives in Great Britain, and she had a UFO sighting about I would say 3 years ago, and that sighting was reported to me, where we were just going to discuss, her and her boyfriend at the time were discussing the sighting of a UFO. But the boyfriend had sent me an email saying, "Well, my girlfriend has been somehow an abductee or contactee since the age of 3, but she doesn't talk about it much." So that caught my attention, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I just want to, I want to touch on that subject before we go further, because it could have. It could mean either I'm dealing with something that could be maybe somebody's imagination, or are we going into something that's more fascinating? And so it actually was the latter. It was actually more fascinating than imagination. And this woman was able to remember vividly some of her experiences when she was 3. And she would continuously see these beings around her when she was very young in the house. And they would come to see her when she was alone. And she would remember them hurting her tummy, she said. She was always having pain in her tummy, where she actually had her mother create a pajama for her, where there was buttons where her tummy was, so she could button the top of her the pajama pants to the bottom of her pajama sweater, so that you couldn't access her tummy. And so she really wanted to be. So she felt protected having this pajama, because she says that these beings would always come and hurt her tummy, but she doesn't remember why. She just remembers seeing them and then remembering this pain in her tummy.
Wow.
And so the events went on with her for about a few years, where she would continuously see these beings. And these beings were tall, white, long-haired beings. They were not the traditional grays that some people report. They were very human-looking, she said, but they were very tall and had this long hair and dressed in white. And were oftentimes so often around her that because of her young age, she thought this was normal. She thought everybody had these tall people in their houses. So she never thought that was unusual. She would talk about it with her parents, but her parents thought she was just she had imaginary friends or something like that. Then came the times where she would be taken up on these spaceships when she was young again, and would be going through some type of experience on these ships. And when she would return, she would go back and this was in the middle of the night. She would run to her parents' room because this had just happened. She was very excited about it, but not in a good way. She was scared and would be talking to her parents, and she would say, my parents would look at me and not understand what I was saying. And she kept remembering, I don't know why my parents don't understand me. And it was later, they later found out that she was speaking Hebrew to them. And she's British. And she couldn't understand why they weren't not understanding her. And the parents found out she was speaking another language. And she's never learned Hebrew. It was a very odd thing.
Does she know Hebrew now?
No. Well, she knows, she's looked into it, but she doesn't speak the language. I mean, she doesn't speak the language at all. Like, she doesn't even. She remembers speaking to her parents, but in her mind, she was speaking English. So it was very strange to have this happen, and it scared her parents a little bit. I mean, they were a little bit freaked out about why their daughter is just so young and speaking another language that they knew she wasn't familiar with. So this went on, and then eventually stopped when she was around 10 to 12 years old, and then she stopped seeing these beings. And it started all over again at her early 20s. And she's had, from what I've been able to record, probably a good 20 to 25 experiences. I call them experiences and not abductions because they're not all on spacecrafts. And they're not all something that she can remember being taken onto a spaceship or having something done on a table or something. She's had experiences where she was even in her bedroom and the beings were doing something to her heart while she was lying down in her bed, unable to move. And she clearly remembers these strange-looking beings. One of them, she remembers saying that it looked like a giant bug. And other ones were what we would consider to be the grays. So this basically evolved from having these experiences with these tall beings with long hair to now seeing the grays, the little grays. And she says there were the shorter grays, and in the background there were these taller grays that were not doing anything. They would just be standing in the room further behind while she was unable to move. And then there was this big, large, bug-like being that was doing something which she remembers is something in her heart. But she wasn't feeling any pain. She said it was just like a pressure in her heart. And these beings were, all around her. And one particular being asked her to close her eyes. Again, this is all, every time these beings are communicating, they're apparently communicating telepathically because I've not yet once heard of a being who actually speaks to somebody, and like we do, and said, just close your eyes. This is for your own good, and that's this experience that she calls the big experience. And that particular event happened in 2012, so only 3 years ago, and it definitely was a very big experience for her where she really realized at that point that there was something bigger going on. It wasn't just beings in the room or, tummy aches. It became much broader than that. And she continues today. We're in contact often. She continues today to have very vivid experiences. I have met with her. The Professor Donderi has also met with her. We both have agreed that she's a very sane person who is describing some very extraordinary experiences. I mean, she has no pictures, so she has only drawings, and she has no markings. We haven't found anything on her body that would indicate that there was some type of operation on her. She had no scars near her heart or anything like that. So, these are things that are sometimes difficult to bring into public domain because already the witness is very, very scared of what's going on, and she recognizes this is completely out of the norm. I mean, what am I talking about? She says, she goes, I can't believe what has happened to me, and I just can tell you that this has happened to me. And so in this case, in these cases, it is very difficult and frustrating for a researcher, because it sometimes requires really an enormous amount of faith at the same time, because you have to somehow, not analyze the person, make sure the person is sane or continues to maintain the same type of story. We will go back and repeat the same thing and ask the same questions in different ways, and sometimes try to tell the story backwards to see if the story makes sense backwards. Similar type of things are done in criminal investigations, where if somebody's saying, I didn't do it, well, explain what happened and then tell me what happened backwards. If you do that properly, then your brain is able to your brain is unable to fabricate things backwards, or it could do it, but it doesn't do it very easily. Yeah. And there's also a lot of things that I was trained to do by David Jacobs. I was also trained by Don Donderi, certain ways of asking questions, certain ways of asking the question in a different way, listening to the witnesses' responses, and all these are really, really human investigations. We're not necessarily talking extraterrestrials. We're talking human experience of something unknown. So, are those beings extraterrestrials? Are they interdimensional beings? Are they the person's imagination? Is the person going through some type of, I don't know, some mental problem? So we look at that very carefully. And so the ones that I work on are the ones that basically passed as many tests as we could put them through in order to at least quantify a certain degree of credibility. And they're really fascinating, and they continue to be fascinating. And the most fascinating of all is a lot of times they connect to each other. So one abductee to another abductee who I'm working with, who don't know each other, and I don't disclose any information from any of them in detail. The things that I do disclose are very minute details, will say exactly the same things.
Well, I want to ask you about that, because one of the things that you said, these beings kind of told this one, and in talking with you about other cases, you've said this, and other researchers have said this.
Correct.
Where the beings kind of say, calm down. This is for your betterment. This everything's fine. Now, David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins think that they're lying to these people, and that it's more of a nefarious sort of thing going on. Do you believe that to be the case?
I have my view on this, and in order to answer something like that, we all, I believe that we all don't have enough data to assume any of those things, because we don't know if we're dealing with the same species of beings. And within those species, I believe there could be a variety of different intentions. I often look at the human being, and we are a wonderful people, a wonderful species, but we can also be a very deadly species. So, if you look at the world, we have many different varieties of humans, and within each of our varieties are good and bad. So this is a natural reality of humans. It would make sense that this would be the same thing with another species. So if you look at dogs, there's some dogs that are really nice dogs, and some dogs are really mean dogs. And there's some great humans, really bad humans, great zebras and really bad zebras, and we just...
I've never met a bad zebra.
Well, I haven't either.
Wonderful creatures.
But this basically is the creation of life. I mean, every species has good and bad. And so it's fair to say that if these beings are real, that it's possible that within their own species there's good and bad, and so they have maybe their own intentions. So some people have had very negative experiences with the Greys, while others have had very positive experiences with the Greys. And actually one of the cases that I have always found to be the most incredible case in this field is the infamous case in Rua, Zimbabwe, which had 62 children. Actually, there was 200 children at that time, but there was 62 that were in proximity to these craft that landed and these beings that came out. And the witnesses that had the opportunity to communicate with the beings, the messages were pretty benign in nature, where they were I wouldn't say a warning, but it was kind of like a message that to humanity, saying you can do better. There's better ways for you to use technology. You have to be careful about the ecology, because the planet, is hurting, and you have to be very careful about the way you use your air and your water. So those are benign messages, and the witnesses, describe these beings as these little, short beings with big heads and big black eyes, which is what we would consider to be the Greys. So, here we have conflicting intentions from the same species, or what we could assume to be the same species. So this brings a lot more questions into the field, because you can't really come to one specific assumption. Are they bad? Are they misleading us? Are they lying to us? Or are some lying to us and misleading us, while other ones are trying to direct us in the right direction? I don't know.
I think you're right in that it's a difficult topic, and I like to, of course, get to that when I talk to people who work on abductions. And, of course, you have, like I mentioned, Bud Hopkins or David Jacobs. It's funny, I mentioned Bud Hopkins like he's still around. Unfortunately, he's not, but he's had such a big impact, and his work is still around. Where, of course, they were in one camp. There's a lot of people, let's say, like a Leo Sprinkle, who's been in this for decades, or some others who are on the positive camp. But then you have a lot of people who are dealing this on an everyday basis. Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, even like Kathleen Martin, and they're in the middle like you, and it's kind of like, well, I think it could be everything. It could be, but it just shows, these are all great researchers, all people I respect, and have done a lot of work. But they're all scattered across the board, and it just seems like even with, most of these researchers would feel that they've talked with hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have had these experiences, but we still don't know.
Well, and it's because the data is insufficient. What we as the researchers are often working with is the result of an action. So we're not involved in understanding why that action was taken. So if, let's say, a perfect example would be if there are two countries that are at war. If one of those countries, or let's say two people get into a fight, and if one of those people was hurting this other person's child, and then you see a fight, then if you arrived when the fight is ending, and the person who's winning the fight is the person who is, let's say, the parent of that child, you would almost judge that person to be an aggressive, mean person because they were beating up somebody else. But we're just analyzing the final data. We don't know why that happened. The person who would arrive on the scene wouldn't know why this happened. And so in an extraterrestrial or interdimensional or any of these types of abductions, we're seeing the final data. We're seeing the result of an action, but we don't know why that happened. And I don't think we will. I don't think that there's a lot of data, for us to go get outside of the final result.
Yeah, and I think that's a difficult concept. What you just said there is that we may never know, and people get upset when you even suggest that sometimes. But, look at Bud Hopkins. exploring this for most of his life. He never knew. He
That's
passed
right.
away without knowing. I've talked to Dr. Leo Sprinkle about this a lot. And he used to say, I can't wait till, we know, and I can go to my old friends and
And
colleagues
say,
and
yeah.
say, look, it was real. But he's like, I don't think I'm going to know by the time that I
Well, I
leave
mean,
this plane.
it's like it's like when a lot of us will say, I wish for world peace, and we all do. I mean, will we have world peace? What a big comment, what a big thing to say, and we would all love to see that. I mean, we would all love to see all nations get along and the planet to heal the planet better and to have a better world for everybody, for our kids and for our grandkids and so on. So we would all love to see a lot of things, and we would all like to have a conclusion to something negative or to something mysterious or to something that is a challenge. But that's almost like a pipe dream. We can't really put it all in one box because it could be a million boxes. It could be a million different reasons, a million different intentions, and in the end, what we have to first agree to, all of us, is that, and not just the viewers, because if anybody's listening to this, it's probably because they do have an interest in the field. But even the people that are not in the field, and the people that are, either they're non-believers or they're very skeptic. Non-believers are different than skeptics. Skeptics are just, they want some proof in order to believe something. Non-believers will just non-believe. They won't believe it even if it just lands in front of them and shakes their hand. So it's the evolution of believing. It's the evolution of accepting that there is another reality out there that is not our everyday stuff. It's not what we see every day. So yes, I personally, this is my personal view, I do believe in a God or in a godlike energy. I don't know if that's a man with a beard or whatever, but I do believe that there's some energy source in the universe that creates life or helps life, or whatever you want to call that. I believe that, but I also believe that life is everywhere. And so that's my view. But a lot of people don't see it like that. They believe that we're alone and that this is just us. And if there's and some people might say the only thing that could be out there is bacteria. And there's a need to open our minds, saying that here on Open Minds, but there's a need to open our minds and our hearts to the potential that there's a lot more than just us.
Well, and I was going to go off on the tangent of astrobiology because I think that's so interesting. But, I talked to others about that. But I want to get more into, I guess, what you've worked in, because your cases, you've worked on some really incredible stuff.
There's another case. We do have, and I mean, I'm allowed to talk about it, but I'm not allowed to release any of the data yet. And I hope to one day release it. But we have, I believe I have we have one of the most incredible pieces of evidence that I've ever come across, or some of the co-researchers that I've worked with or work with have seen as well. And it's these photographs of this being that was photographed in January of 2010 by a witness in Montreal. We have about, I believe there are 14 different images, and the five of those images are very telling. We had them analyzed thoroughly for the last couple of years. So far, they're as authentic as we can say, and it clearly shows a being. This woman was about 2 to 3 feet away from this being that was able to paralyze her dog, but did not paralyze her. And she was able to snap these photographs of this being, and it's incredibly telling. I mean, the actual report came to me through a police officer from the Montreal Police Department,
And so the police officer approached you about this.
Well, yeah, the police officer approached me about. Well, actually, we met because he came to find out about me through a common person that we both knew, and knew that I was involved in the field, in the research. So we met and decided to open up about this, and told me that it's quite freaky, and it's it's obviously we don't know what to do with it. So he came to see me. He says, at first when he got these photographs from this witness, that she was going to file for a intruder report because this happened inside an apartment building. So, obviously, when he got the call, he wasn't exactly sure who he was gonna meet, because he heard kind of what the story was about and got there and was pretty fascinated with what actually what the witness herself. It was a woman, and then with what the images were. So he took it seriously because he believed her, and he went back to the station and he showed it to a few other officers, and they all kind of ridiculed it, but they all agreed, yeah, well, there is something in the image that doesn't look normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's someone, not something. Someone, some creature of some type is there, but it's not one of us. So, and it didn't look like a dog, or it didn't look like an animal. It didn't look like any house pet that one would have in that apartment building.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't know what to do with it, and so they kept it in a drawer for a couple of years. They really, nobody wants to go public with, I think I have pictures of a something.
Yeah.
It's a very, very sensitive topic. We all know that. So finally got to meet with him, and he was, convinced that this was something that was worth looking at. I received the images. When I got them, I went through them, and when I finally got to see what they were, I got goosebumps, because I realized, this is interesting. This is really, really interesting stuff. And so I sent them over to a photo and video expert whom I work with, and had them analyzed thoroughly. And the initial feedback was that some of the images were just of poor quality. There was not much that we could extract from them, but it was the 5 last images that were very good. And the last of the images was the best image, where you actually see this creature, and it's standing right in front of her, and you can see the actual body of this thing. You can see the head, the eyes, the body, the shoulders.
Can you explain the circumstances in which she took the pictures?
She was. Her and her husband were sleeping. This was in an apartment building, one of the top floors of in a residential apartment building in Montreal. She had a big Doberman King dog, which I've met, and is definitely a big Doberman King dog. And she was sleeping, and it was 1 a.m. when she heard her dog make a very strange sound, something that she's never heard before. So she got up. It startled her. She looked at the clock, and she remembers it being 1 a.m. Her husband was still sleeping. She didn't wake him up or anything. She just got up and went into the, let's say, the hallway of the apartment, and noticed her dog was sitting with its ears up and completely paralyzed, and like staring into oblivion, basically. And she started snapping her fingers and trying to, touching the dog, like just snap out of it. And the dog was completely immobilized, not responsive at all, but completely awake, opened eyes, ears up, like if something was going on. So it totally freaked her out, and she went to get her iPhone, and she snapped 3 pictures of her dog before she even knew what was going on. And the dog was pointed towards the door of her apartment. And so just to give you a quick side note, a week prior, the witness and her husband had forgotten their keys in the apartment, locking themselves out. And the janitor of the building didn't have the key, so the only way for them to get in was to break open the door, the lock, to get into the apartment. So in the frame of the door to get out of her apartment, there was a little gap because of the crowbar that was used that she could see through into the hallway. And this was a week before this event, so they hadn't repaired it yet. So it was just, she was able to lock the door with another lock, but this particular area of the frame, there was a little gap. And I actually went back there and I was able to confirm. You could see it was repaired, but you could still see the damage that had been done to that frame. And so she saw the dog was staring at the front door, so she figured maybe somebody's outside in the hallway. And so she looks and stares outside and sees this shadowy thing move. And she didn't make any detail out of it. So she goes, "Oh my God, there's somebody out there." So she grabs her phone again and she brings the phone as close as she could to that little opening on the frame to see if she could take pictures of whoever was there, because she says, she said to us, "I'll take pictures in case it's an intruder. I'll show the police." Maybe he's trying to break into some other apartment, or he or she or whatever. And finally, this thing walked towards her door, and she was able at that point to see what it looked like and realized that she wasn't seeing anything that she had ever seen before. This freaked her out enormously because she described it being incredibly skeletal and bug-like.
Mm-hmm.
She says it was a 3-foot tall, weird-looking being. She said it had a very big head, very big black eyes, and it was very, very skinny. And remembers the position of its arms to be very, very strange, almost like the position of what a praying mantis looks like when its arms are retracted. And she said that when it was further away, she was able to see or identify that it had an extra set of arms near its waistline, but she wasn't sure about that. She kept saying, "I saw something," but when it came closer, as it moved closer, that portion of its body was hidden by the frame of the door, so she couldn't really see all of it at that point. So for a split second, she says, "I think I saw an extra set of arms." Anyway, this being got really close, and she was freaked out. I mean, it was right on the other side of her door. So she starts snapping pictures of it, but they were not as clear as the initial pictures were not very clear. And at a certain point, she started talking to it, and I was impressed with her. I said, "That's incredible. I mean, you had the courage to start talking to this thing. Most people would have just ran screaming, 'Oh my God!' And she says, I wasn't scared." She had no idea about UFOs or ETs or anything like that. She was telling me, she goes, "I thought it was a ghost or a demon or an angel," or she goes, "I didn't know what I was looking at," she goes, "but I knew it wasn't normal." Mm-hmm. But she never made the connection to anything within the UFO phenomenon.
When she talked to it, did she talk to it with her mouth?
She talked to it with her mouth, and because she's Romanian background, she spoke in multiple languages to it. She spoke to it in English, then in French, and then in Romanian. And she kept saying, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you there?" And as she was doing this, it got closer, and it would. She said it was like peeking. It was like moving out of her visual view and then moving back in. It was going left to right, kind of wanting to she says, almost like it was playful. And suddenly she says, "Can I take a picture of you?" And believe it or not, this is where I kind of got weirded out. And she says, "It smiled at me." And when she told me that at first, I was, "Are you serious? This thing smiled at you?" And she says, "Yeah, it smiled at me." And she goes, "And I snapped a picture at that time." And so I'll go back to that picture in a second. And so she says at that point, she really positioned the camera right the right angle into the frame and snap 5 consecutive pictures, which we consider to be the best of these pictures. And the result is incredible. I mean, I was blown away with what I saw. So was the police officer, actually, and so was she. And she then says to me, she says, when I came to, it was gone. And I said to her, I said, what do you mean when you came to? She says, I started feeling like I was in a daze, like if I wasn't myself anymore. And so when I came to out of that, my dog was okay and the being was gone. And so I ran to my husband and woke him up and told him about this. And I said, really? And she says, and it was 2:30 in the morning when I woke him up. And I thought, okay, so an hour and a half went by? And she says, yeah. I said, well, you don't have an hour and a half of story to tell me here. Mm-hmm. You know, what you just told me could not have happened in an hour and a half. And she says, well, I don't know. She says, all I know is that I went and wake up my husband and it was 2:30 in the morning. And so we've determined that whatever had happened to her must have taken a maximum of 10 to 15 minutes at tops. I mean, this is really pushing it. And we can't make up the rest of the time. So I tried.
And you said she woke up in the hallway.
No, she woke up where she was. Like she
in the
always
apartment.
inside the apartment.
Okay.
Absolutely. I asked her. I said, "Why didn't you open the door?" I mean, it was. She goes, "Are you crazy? It was so scary, and I can't believe this was happening." And so I said, "Okay, well that makes sense. I mean, you did get a little freaked out. I mean, it was almost strange how not freaked out she was when this was going on." And so. We asked her, would you like to, go public with this? And she says, absolutely not. I absolutely don't feel comfortable about that. I don't know what happened. She says, I have my little girl and we have our little life and we don't want, to any of this stuff. I don't know what happened that night. I know it happened to me. It scared me. And she kept referring to it as a demon. She goes, maybe it was a demon or something. So I don't want to know about it. It really freaked us out. And so I tried, to tell her, it's okay if you talk about it. And she says, I'm talking about it with you, but I don't want to do anything with this. I'm really sorry. I don't want anything to do with this. So I asked her, can I show the pictures? I mean, can I share the pictures? Absolutely not. I don't want these out because I'm sure, you're going to come back to me with, wanting to go. People are going to want to know more about this. And she's really, really very, very scared about associating herself to anything paranormal. Mm-hmm. And so this was unfortunate because I couldn't, I promised her I wouldn't, distribute the images, and the officer that was with me there also said, well, if she says no, then it's no, and we're not allowed to do anything with that. But
and now my viewers are going to be very frustrated.
Well, the only thing I can say to the listeners is that I've recently spoken to her again and told her that we did a lot of work on them since I last spoke to her, and we did. And we said we would like to release these in the public domain so that people can analyze them and see what this is all about. But we would need your permission. And she said, okay, well, let's meet soon and we can discuss in person. So that's the only thing I have from her at this point. And I'm not pushing her. I mean, I don't want to be pushy or anything because I respect her family, her little daughter. And she told me, she says, we have our little life and it's very precious to us. So we don't want to, we don't want to get more scared than we were. Yeah. So I understand that. And so I'll definitely keep everybody up to date because if these things are released, they are absolutely incredible.
Yeah, they're fascinating. Pictures are difficult because I don't know that you could say it's proof.
Absolutely.
But they are fascinating. And one of the things you've done, which is really cool, is you have since, because you guys clean it up, where you can kind of see what this
Yes.
thing looks a little
Yes.
more.
Well, you've seen them.
And since you have gotten drawings
Yes.
from other abductees
Yes.
or found some
Yes.
online
Yes. Yes.
that look very similar.
Actually, one person whom I can say publicly, and it's a witness that lives in Dallas, Texas, and she was actually in a documentary called The Hidden Hand. She's one of the abductees that was interviewed on that documentary. Her name is Joni Strother, and she lives in Dallas, Texas. I was researching the shape of this being that we see in the picture, and I was trying to find if any other abductee or contactee had ever seen anything like this, or had drawn anything like this. And I did, and I found Joni, and she had drawn this being that looked incredibly similar to what we have in the picture. I mean, little details that are incredible. And so I contacted Joni, and we had a really long discussion. Joni has actually never seen the pictures because she lives in Dallas. So I was, like I said, I was not allowed to send them out to anybody. So I had a long conversation with Joni. She was very open about discussing what had happened to her and what this being looked like. And it definitely does look, I mean, it's incredibly similar to what we have in the picture. So I continue, and that was fascinating. So I kept that in my files, and I put, sometimes I show people, I put the picture and I put Joni's drawing next to it, and everybody says, yeah, it does look similar. And then there was this same abductee that I was discussing about earlier, who had this bug-like being in her room with these other grays, and she also drew this bug-like being. And again, this witness had absolutely no idea of Joni's drawing, neither my pictures. This is something that I never shared with anyone. And her drawing was also very similar in terms of the anatomy of this being.
Yeah, where the arms are kind of like a sickle.
Yes, they're
in
like,
a way, and that
well, if you
curves
imagine,
coming inside.
correct. Yeah, correct. It's like a praying mantis. I mean, if you go on Google and you just Google praying mantis, you'll see when a praying mantis's arms are retracted, they're kind of like curved in the opposite way a human or a mammal would use the arms. And so we came to the conclusion that whatever this creature was had a similar anatomy to an insect, but obviously not. I've never seen a 3-foot tall insect,
Right.
and if I did, I'd probably run for the hills.
Yeah.
So yeah.
My grandma has a story of a large insect.
Really?
Yep, in the San Luis Valley, which lots of mysterious stuff. And I've mentioned this on the show, but not for years, I don't think, because Chris O'Brien talks about it sometimes because he does all the research in the San Luis Valley in Colorado.
Okay.
But she said that she was a little kid playing under the table. This is my great-grandma, actually.
Okay.
And somebody came to the door, pounded on the door, and said they had been chasing a 6-foot praying mantis around out in the fields there. And so her dad got his gun, and I think her uncle, and they went out to go look, and they didn't find anything, but pretty weird.
Yeah, to absolutely, and as I looked into it further, I spoke to some researchers and tried to see if anybody could give me some info on other cases, because I mean you can only find so much out there that's public domain. I did find a few interesting cases that I haven't looked into. I have to admit, but that speak of these very big praying mantis beings. They're 5 foot, 6 foot tall, and it's very interesting. I mean, I don't know if we have any of those on the planet, but what interests me is that if we did, I don't know how this thing got into an apartment building in Montreal and got out and nobody saw it. This is, with security doors and all that. So if it is a natural, if it is something that is terrestrial, if you want to call it, then, my hat off to this being for being able to walk into a secured building and walking out without getting caught.
Right.
On any camera, by the way. Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time, but I know you've had some involvement with the Ruwa case.
Yes.
And what is that? And
well, this is the one case that is very, very near and dear to my heart. And I'm here, I came to visit you guys today, and I brought along a very good friend of mine, and her name is Emily Trim. And Emily was one of the children that was there during that infamous event on September 16th, 1994 in Ruwa, Zimbabwe.
And I guess people might know it best because John Mack
Correct.
did some investigation. I mean, it was on the news.
That's right.
It's been a documentary. So the Ariel School, elementary school. So that hopefully will ring some bells for people. If they don't know it, they need to look it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a very big, very good documentary that is in the works, and it's being done by a gentleman called Randall Nickerson. Randall was very close with John Mack at the time. Randall's a great guy who's been has dedicated a lot of his time and efforts to bring together all the witnesses and all this story. I mean, it goes far beyond just the school children that were at Ariel Elementary School that day. And the documentary is, you could find the trailer of the documentary on his website, and it's www.ariel, A-R-I-E-L, phenomenon.com. This is, in my opinion, I've always, since this happened, I've always been, and since it was, it had become public when John Mack had gone to Ruwa, Zimbabwe to interview the children, this to me was always, I always considered it to be the most credible event I had ever heard of. And the reason why is because, you had 62 children individually interviewed saying exactly the same story over and over again, and they keep saying the same story 21 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So, John Mack had come to the conclusion that, this something had happened that day. We don't know who it was and what it was, but we know that it was some type of craft that landed near the perimeter of the log barrier of the school playground, and these beings came out of this, if you want to call it a ship or object, and they were hovering around and they were scattering around the ship, and then two of them came very, very close to some of the children, and Emily, who's here, was one of those children that was right there 5 feet away in broad daylight to these floating beings that, we call today the Greys. They look like the Greys. We don't know if they were or not, but looked like it. And received telepathic messages, these images that were projected into their minds. And the images the images in the messages were incredibly telling. I mean, for me, that was the most important event ever, because I've heard of great stories in the field, and I believe that there's been a lot of things that have gone on, things that we don't even know of. But this particular case was so incredible, so powerful, because of the number of witnesses and the number of credible, innocent children. I mean, these are children that were not exposed to television shows or ads or internet or anything that could have maybe contaminated their minds or made them come up with very vivid imaginations of extraterrestrials or beings and so on. So this was really, really a unique event, and also the fact that the messages that were given to the children were not messages that were very common back in 1994. I mean, saving the world, the ecology of the planet, saving our water, saving our air, using the how to use our technology better. These are things that, we talk about a lot today, but back in 1994 in Rua, Zimbabwe, that was not a very popular topic of conversation. So it adds to a lot of credibility to the story, and I really feel, and I'm helping as much as I can. Helping Randall. Randall is in the middle of raising funds to finalize this documentary, because I really think that it merits all the popularity that it should have.
I mean, in our very first issue of our magazine, we had a story. I think Randall wrote it, actually, or it was written about Randall in his documentary from our friend Antonio, who worked here. Yeah. And he was friends with Randall for many years, because Randall is back in New York, where Antonio lived. And then we had him at our conference, and we've been so anxious to see his documentary. He's an amazing photographer,
Absolutely.
And I mean, the video I've seen is so beautiful of the interviews with the kids. So I'm really excited about it. I can't wait. And thank you so much for bringing Emily. She's a little shy to talk about stuff, so hopefully we'll be able to interview her. And because the listeners will know, we spoke with the Allagash guys, and they had this aspect lots of people don't know about, where they're artists and their art had changed. And Emily also is an artist, and she's got some
a real amazing artist.
Some amazing art that relates to all of this. So hopefully she'll come on and talk to us about it. It's been absolutely fascinating to meet her, and both of you. Maybe she'll walk over to your microphone and at least say hi. Oh, here she
Come
comes.
on over.
Hi, how's it going out there?
There she is, to prove that she's really here.
Yes, she is.
Exist, yes.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to talk to Emily some more about her amazing art and experiences.
Absolutely. We'll set something up so that we can sit down and discuss it. And maybe we can put some of my art on your website so that the viewers can see.
That would be so great. I mean, because it's gorgeous as art by itself. But then the listeners especially would appreciate someone like the Allagash guys who have had these experiences that the art has been inspired, or inspires the artwork, is just boggles the mind. It's one of the most amazing things.
Absolutely, and that's actually I'm a big fan, because when you look at Emily's art, you see she's able to draw and paint and depict what she saw and what she's experienced. And it gives you a visual of an incredible event, which is it's very telling.
Well, and people know I'm pretty skeptical when it comes to this field, but I think this is a case where this is one of these examples where we are receiving messages, from somewhere else via this artwork.
Yeah, it's my artwork is a channeled artwork, and it's very difficult for me to come forward and say that, because I have anxiety, so it's something that prevents me from coming forward and admitting something like this. But it does exist. It's channeled, and so I'll put some out there for you to be able to view.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we'll be talking to Emily some more. Thank you so much, Luigi, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Is there a website people can go to find out more about what you're working on?
I don't have a website. Anybody can actually email me.
Okay.
If ever they have any questions, I'll give you my email if you'd like right here.
Yeah.
And it's my company email. Believe it or not, I run a part of my company is a drone company, so it's Luigi LUIGI at droneview DRONEVU.com.
Okay.
So they can send me any emails, or if anybody has had any very strange experiences, or if you know of anybody who've had experiences with these strange type of beings, I'm more than willing to look and listen to some of the stories.
And that's one of the great things you've been able to do while you're out here is teach us how to use our drone, because we just got an open mind drone. We'll probably get some cool video of it.
You guys just got yourselves one of the best. I mean, it's a DJI Inspire 1. So I'm just going to go out there with you guys now and show you a few tricks on how to use it, because it's going to be an excellent tool.
It's amazing
to videotape, anywhere. I mean, if you're going to videotape a location or a sighting, a site where something's happened, it's an excellent way to take pictures.
Yeah, hopefully we can take it out. Another amazing case of Travis Walton.
Yeah,
take
that
it
would
out
be great. Yeah.
with him. All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Luigi for being on the show, and thank you so much for Emily for joining in and saying hi to everyone. I am so excited to share with you more about her and what's going on with her. It's just so coincidental, again, that we recently had all these interviews with the Allagash guys, because many of you will know about this Ruwa case, this aerial school case, which is one of the most amazing cases ever. And she's an actual witness, and so we'll talk to her more soon. And she is also, this whole encounter has inspired this art where she's got all these images and symbols and stuff coming out of her, and she doesn't know where it's coming from, and she believes it is related to her experience, and she wants to draw these aliens and this weirdness and all of this stuff. It's really amazing, and we'll be sharing all of that with you soon, within the next couple of months. I'm going to be out of town next week, so we're not going to have a show next week, but we'll be back the week after that. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, thanks to Jason for joining us every week and talking news with me. That's always a ton of fun. Thank you to the gentleman who gave us the opening and the close music, Caleb Hanks. You can find out more about him on the radio page at openminds.tv. So thank you to a lot of others. I always forget to say thank you to Podcast UFO, who has me on talking about news there. That's a great show. And Martin, the host, is a great guy.